I thought I was arriving for just another Sunday dinner with my grandmother, but instead I found complete strangers touring her house with a realtor. What I discovered about my uncle's betrayal was so sick and twisted that I knew I had to destroy him. But the revenge I got, it was so perfect that he lost everything, and I mean everything. You won't believe how this story ends. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Emily, I'm 24 years old, and my grandmother, Rose, is the most important person in my world. She's been my rock ever since I was 12, when my parents died in a car accident that turned my entire life upside down. While other kids were dealing with typical teenage drama, I was learning how to navigate grief, and Rose, as she liked me to call her, was right there beside me every step of the way. She didn't just take me in, she gave me a home filled with love, homemade cookies, and bedtime stories that made me forget, even for a little while, about everything I'd lost. Rose is 89 years old and sharp as a tack. She lives in this gorgeous Victorian house that she and my grandfather bought 60 years ago. It's painted this soft yellow color with white trim, has a wraparound porch with hanging flower baskets, and the most beautiful garden you've ever seen. Rose has always been crystal clear about one thing: she wants to die in that house. It's where she raised her children, where she cried when my grandfather passed away, and where she created a lifetime of memories. That house isn't just where she lives, it's who she is. My Uncle Roy is Rose's oldest son, and for most of my life, I thought he was a decent guy. He's 58, recently divorced, and honestly, he's been struggling. His business ventures never seemed to work out. He lost his job about 2 years ago, and I heard through family gossip that he was facing foreclosure on his own house. I felt bad for him, you know? Everyone deserves compassion when they're going through a rough patch. About a year ago, Roy started visiting Rose more often. At first, I thought it was sweet. He'd show up with groceries, help her organize her paperwork, and always talked about wanting to make sure she was taken care of. During family gatherings, everyone praised him for being such a devoted son. Roy is such a blessing, Aunt Linda would say. Rose is so lucky to have a son who cares this much. But slowly, things started changing in ways that made my stomach twist with unease. It started small. Rose began mentioning that Roy was telling her she was getting confused about money matters. He says I mix up my bills sometimes, she'd tell me during our weekly phone calls, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Rose had been managing her own finances perfectly for decades, so this seemed strange, but I convinced myself that maybe aging was finally catching up with her. Then I noticed that Roy had started intercepting Rose's mail. He'd organized all her important documents into folders and took control of her banking. When I asked Rose about it, she seemed flustered. Roy says it's too complicated for me now, she'd say, but there was something in her eyes that looked almost defeated. The changes in Rose's personality were what really started to scare me. This woman who had been my fearless protector, who never backed down from anything, was becoming withdrawn. During family barbecues, she'd sit quietly while Roy dominated conversations about taking care of Mom's affairs. If she tried to speak up about her finances or her house, Roy would quickly cut her off with comments that made my blood boil. "Oh Mom, you know you get mixed up about these things," he'd say with this patronizing smile that made me want to scream. Or worse, "At your age, you shouldn't worry about complicated matters like this. Just trust me to handle everything." The most heartbreaking part was watching Rose's confidence crumble. This woman who had raised 4 children, survived the Great Depression, and built a successful life was suddenly being treated like she couldn't think for herself. And the worst part? She was starting to believe it. I tried to voice my concerns to the family, but every time I did, they made me feel like I was the problem. During a family barbecue last summer, I pulled Aunt Linda aside and told her I was worried about how Roy was talking to Rose. "Oh honey," Linda said, patting my hand like I was still 12 years old, "Roy is just looking out for his mother. You're young, you don't understand how complicated elder care can be. Rose is lucky to have a son who's so devoted." When I tried talking to my cousin Jake, Roy's son, he was even worse. "Dad's been handling everything perfectly," he said dismissively. "Grandma's lucky to have him." Maybe you should focus on your college studies instead of creating family drama." That phrase, family drama, became their weapon of choice whenever I questioned anything. I was just a college student creating drama. I was too young to understand. I was overreacting because of stress from finals. Every concern I raised was dismissed, and slowly, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Roy really was just helping, and I was reading too much into things. Maybe at 89, Rose really was getting confused, and I was just too stubborn to accept that the woman who raised me was aging. The guilt was eating me alive. But then, about 3 months ago, I walked into Rose's kitchen and overheard Roy on the phone. His back was to me, and he was speaking in this cold, calculating voice I'd never heard before. "Yeah, the old lady won't be a problem much longer," he said quietly. "Once I get her declared incompetent, we can move forward with everything." My blood turned to ice. I stood there frozen, listening to my uncle talk about my grandmother like she was an obstacle to be removed. When he turned around and saw me, his expression changed instantly back to that fake concerned smile. "Emily, I didn't hear you come in," he said, shoving his phone into his pocket. "What did you just say about Grandma?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Roy didn't even flinch. He looked me straight in the eye and lied with such confidence that it made me question my own sanity. "You misheard me, Emily. I was talking about a client situation from my old job. You're really letting college stress get to you, aren't you? Maybe you should talk to someone about managing your anxiety." I stood there feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Had I misheard him? Was I really so stressed that I was imagining things? Roy's gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I started doubting what I'd clearly heard with my own ears. But deep in my gut, I knew what I'd heard. And I knew that my beloved grandmother, the woman who had saved me when I had nothing left, was in danger from the one person who should have been protecting her. I just didn't know yet how much danger she was really in. 3 weeks after overhearing that chilling phone call, I decided I needed to see Rose more often. Something in my gut told me she was running out of time, though I had no idea just how right I was. That Sunday, I skipped my usual study group and drove the 40 minutes to her house, planning to surprise her with her favorite blueberry muffins from the bakery downtown. But as I pulled into her driveway, my heart nearly stopped. There was a bright red Century 21 van parked right in front of her house, and I could see people with clipboards walking around her front yard, taking photos and measurements. My hands started shaking as I sat in my car, trying to process what I was seeing. I walked up to the front door on unsteady legs and heard voices inside. Lots of voices. Strangers' voices in my grandmother's sacred space. The front door was propped open, and I could see people walking through Rose's living room like they owned the place, pointing at her antique furniture and discussing staging potential. "The current occupant will be relocated to assisted living within 30 days, I heard a woman's voice say from upstairs. "So you'll have a completely vacant property for your renovation plans." The words hit me like a physical blow. Current occupant? They were talking about Rose like she was a tenant being evicted, not the rightful owner of the home she'd lived in for 60 years. I pushed past a couple examining Rose's china cabinet and found her in the kitchen, sitting at her small breakfast table with Roy standing over her. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, almost fragile, with this lost expression that broke my heart into pieces. Roy was holding a stack of papers and pointing to different lines, while talking in that same patronizing voice that made my skin crawl. "There you are, Mom," Roy was saying. "See, right here where you signed yesterday? You agreed that the house is too much for you to manage anymore." Rose looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Emily, honey, I keep telling Roy that I don't want to move, but he says I already agreed to sell the house. He shows me these papers with my signature, but I don't remember signing anything about selling my home." The desperation in her voice made something snap inside me. "Roy, what the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. Roy straightened up and gave me that fake smile that I was learning to hate. "Emily, perfect timing. I was just helping Mom finalize the details of her move to Sunset Manor. It's a beautiful assisted living facility, and she'll be so much happier there." "I don't want to go to Sunset Manor," Rose said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to stay in my home." "Mom, we've been through this," Roy said, and I wanted to punch him for the condescending tone. "You're confused about what you want. The doctors said that's normal at your age." "What doctors?" I snapped. "Rose hasn't seen any doctors recently." Roy's jaw tightened. "Emily, you're a 24-year-old college student. You don't understand the complexities of elder care or legal matters. Mom has dementia, and she can't make rational decisions about her living situation anymore." "I do not have dementia," Rose said with more fire than I'd heard from her in months. "I remember everything perfectly. I remember you telling me I was confused when I said I didn't want to sell. I remember you saying I already signed papers when I know I didn't." That's when Roy's mask finally slipped. "Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself in front of Emily. This is exactly why you need professional care." Before I could respond, Aunt Linda came bustling into the kitchen like she owned the place. "Oh good, Emily's here," she said in this fake cheerful voice. "Roy was just telling me how smoothly everything is going with your grandmother's transition." "What transition?" I said through gritted teeth. Linda looked at me like I was being deliberately difficult. "Emily, honey, your uncle has power of attorney. This is all perfectly legal. Roy knows what's best for his mother." "Since when does he have power of attorney?" I demanded. Roy pulled out a folder and showed me documents with official-looking letterhead. "Since Mom signed these papers last month. See? It's all legitimate." I looked at the papers, and even though I'm not a lawyer, something felt wrong about them. The signature didn't look quite right, and Rose was staring at them like she'd never seen them before in her life. "I never signed those," Rose said firmly. "Mom, you're confused," Roy said, but this time his voice had a sharp edge to it. "We went to the lawyer's office together. You signed them in front of a notary." "I would remember going to a lawyer's office," Rose insisted, and I could hear the frustration building in her voice. That's when Jake walked in, and the kitchen suddenly felt way too small for all the toxic energy. "Hey Emily," he said casually, like finding strangers touring his grandmother's house was totally normal. "Dad told me you might give him a hard time about this, but Grandma will be so much better off at Sunset Manor. This house is way too big for her to manage alone." I felt like I was in some alternate reality where everyone had lost their minds. "She's managed it perfectly for 60 years, I said. "That was before," Linda chimed in. "Before the dementia started affecting her judgment." "She doesn't have dementia," I shouted, finally losing my composure. Roy stepped closer to me, and his voice became cold and threatening. "Emily, you're creating a scene. Your grandmother is becoming a burden, whether you want to admit it or not. She's old, she's confused, and frankly, keeping her in this big house is selfish. I'm making the hard decisions that need to be made, because no one else in this family has the backbone to do what's necessary." "A burden?" I repeated, feeling rage building in my chest like a wildfire. "Yes, a burden," Roy said matter-of-factly. "Look at her, Emily. She can barely take care of herself. When you're older and more mature, you'll understand that sometimes loving someone means making choices they don't like." That's when Rose started crying. Not just tearing up, but really sobbing in a way that shattered my heart. "I just want to stay in my home," she whispered through her tears. "I don't understand why no one will listen to me. This is my house. I just want to die in my own bed." And that's when I knew. Watching my grandmother, this incredible woman who had raised me and loved me and saved me, reduced to begging to stay in her own home, while her son treated her like a defective appliance that needed to be disposed of. The woman who had held me while I cried about my parents, who had taught me how to be strong, who had never given up on me even when I gave up on myself, was being systematically destroyed by the people who were supposed to protect her. Roy wasn't just stealing her house. He was stealing her dignity, her autonomy, and her will to fight back. And I was the only one who could see it. "The closing is scheduled for Friday," Roy announced, like he was discussing the weather. "The buyers are paying cash, so there won't be any delays. Mom will move to Sunset Manor on Saturday." I looked at Rose, who had stopped crying, and was staring at her hands with this expression of complete defeat. Then I looked at Roy, who was smiling like he'd already won. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. Because I wasn't just Rose's granddaughter. I was the girl she had raised to never back down from a fight. And if Roy wanted to play games with legal documents and manipulation, then that's exactly what we were going to do. Except I was going to play to win. I left Rose's house that Sunday with my mind racing and my heart broken, but I wasn't going to let Roy destroy her. I had 5 days before the closing, and I was going to use every single one of them. The first thing I did was call in sick to all my classes for the week. My professors could fail me if they wanted to, but saving my grandmother was more important than any grade. Then I drove straight back to Rose's house after Roy and his enablers left. "Rose," I said, sitting down at her kitchen table, "I need you to tell me the truth about everything. And I mean everything." That's when my grandmother surprised me in the most incredible way. She got up, walked to her bedroom, and came back with a composition notebook that was filled with her neat handwriting. "I've been keeping track of everything Roy has been doing," she said, and suddenly her voice was stronger, more focused than I'd heard it in months. "I've been writing down dates, times, conversations, witnesses. I've been pretending to be more confused than I am because I wanted to see exactly how far he would go." My mouth fell open as I flipped through pages and pages of detailed documentation. Rose had recorded every manipulation, every lie, every forged document. She had been building a case this entire time. "Rose, you've been sharp this whole time?" "Of course I have," she said with a little smile. "I didn't survive the Great Depression and raise 4 children by being a pushover. But I needed someone I could trust to help me fight back. Someone Roy wouldn't suspect." We spent the next 3 days working together like a team. I researched elder abuse laws while Rose organized her evidence. We discovered that Roy's power of attorney documents were completely fake. The notary stamp was wrong, the witness signatures were forged, and the lawyer's office he claimed to have used had no record of Rose ever being there. On Wednesday, we met with an elder law attorney who nearly fell out of his chair when he saw Rose's documentation. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "this is one of the most thorough cases of attempted financial elder abuse I've ever seen. And the evidence you've gathered is remarkable." We prepared legitimate power of attorney papers with me as Rose's chosen agent, and we contacted Adult Protective Services to file a formal complaint against Roy. Everything was legal, everything was documented, and everything was ready. Roy had no idea what was coming. Friday morning arrived, and Roy showed up at Rose's house with 3 men in cheap suits who were supposedly his cash buyers. I was hidden in Rose's bedroom, watching through the crack in the door as they set up their fake closing on her kitchen table. "Okay, Mom," Roy said in that patronizing voice, "just a few signatures, and then we can get you settled into your new home." But instead of the confused, defeated old woman he expected, Rose was sitting perfectly straight in her chair, completely alert and composed. "Before I sign anything, Roy, I think we need to have a conversation." I watched Roy's face change as he realized something was different. "Mom, we don't need to talk about this again. We've been through everything already, have we?" Rose asked calmly. "Because I don't remember agreeing to sell my house. I don't remember signing any power of attorney papers. And I certainly don't remember meeting these gentlemen before." The 3 fake buyers were starting to look very uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and glancing at each other nervously. That's when I walked into the kitchen carrying my folder of legal documents, with our attorney joining us on speakerphone, and the Adult Protective Services caseworker taking notes from her seat by the window. Roy's face went completely white. "Emily, what is this?" "This," I said, setting the folder on the table, "is the real power of attorney, properly executed, properly notarized, and giving me legal authority over Rose's affairs, because she chose me as her agent." Rose reached into her notebook and pulled out a small recording device. "This is every conversation you've had with me for the past 3 months, Roy, including the ones where you admitted you were forging my signature and planning to have me declared incompetent." The fake buyers were already standing up to leave. "We don't want any part of this," one of them muttered, heading for the door. Roy tried every desperate move he could think of. He claimed Rose was confused and I had manipulated her. He threatened to contest the power of attorney. He even tried begging, saying he was just trying to help and promising to call everything off if we didn't press charges. But Rose had one more surprise for him. "Roy," she said, and her voice was steel, "for months you told me I was confused. You made me feel crazy and worthless. You told everyone I had dementia when you knew I was perfectly fine. You forged my signature and tried to steal my home. But most of all, you made me feel like I was a burden to my own family. Roy was sweating now, realizing that his whole scheme was falling apart. But I was never confused about one thing, Rose continued. I knew I had raised a son who would try to steal from his own mother. And that breaks my heart more than losing this house ever could. The Adult Protective Services worker closed her notebook. Mr. Patterson, you're facing charges of elder abuse, attempted fraud, and forgery. The State Attorney General's office will be in touch. 6 months later, Roy pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. He lost his case, paid massive fines, and spent 8 months in county jail. The family members who enabled him were forced to face the truth about what they had supported. Rose updated her will, leaving Roy absolutely nothing. As for Rose, she's still living in her beautiful Victorian house, tending her garden, and making the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. I moved back home after graduation to be closer to her, and we have dinner together every Sunday, just like always. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Roy. The answer is simple: when someone tries to destroy the person you love most in the world, you don't feel bad about stopping them. You feel proud that you were strong enough to fight back. Rose taught me that being underestimated can be your greatest weapon, and sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's proving everyone wrong about what you're capable of. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about people who fought back and won. And remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, don't stay silent. There are people who will help, and there are ways to fight back. You just have to be brave enough to take that first step.